across America. Live, this is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, April 24th, 2019 day. I am your host for the Millennial Roundtable, Nick Pitts, and I am gratefully joined by two stellar guests that will be joining me for the entire 3 hours, but also having to put up with me as well. And so we've got David Fraga that's also joining us. David, how are you today?
Doing well, man. Doing well.
So good to see you. So good to see you. And Chelsey, long time no see. How are you?
I know, it's been a while. I'm doing well.
Yeah?
Doing well.
So good. So good. Well, we have got quite a show for you all today. We're going to be joined a little bit later on during the hour by Girien Salazer of the Faith and Education Coalition. He's going to be talking with us a little bit more about some of the admission standards as well as student loans relative to Hispanic students going into college as well. And we'll have some open lines later on during the day, but obviously we're going to be addressing everything relative to Sri Lanka. Reports now have just surfaced within the hour that it's further connecting the Sri Lankan attacks against Christians, but it was perpetuated by ISIS. And so we'll be talking a little bit about how ISIS has shifted from being centrally located within Iraq and Syria and more into being an empowering, almost to a certain degree, a terrorist consultant around the world. And we'll be talking a little bit about that. We'll be shifting over and also talking about Ross Douthat's recent op-ed that he published earlier this week about Christians. Are they persecuted or are they privileged? And then the millennial woes relative to finances. And so we'll be talking a little bit about how millennials are feeling the woes of having to save, invest, and figuring out what it looks like to live into a world in which responsibilities are required of them. But before we go forward, what many of you have told me, it's fascinating. So Chelsey, I like to think Chelsey's the star of this show. She always you
I like
all,
to think that too. No,
you
I'm just
all
kidding.
write her letters. You make her feel very valued and appreciated, and I am so grateful for that because I know that I am humbled being around Chelsey. But you all have shown me acknowledgement, I guess I should say, would be the best way to put it. So as you know, I've been rooting for my Nashville Predators, have been playing the Dallas Stars over the past almost 2 weeks now. And that series concluded on Monday night in quite a heartbreak to remind us of God's, of the brokenness of the world, I should say, where evil triumphed over good. The Stars beat the Predators in Game 6 in an overtime thriller 2-1, which was, my goodness, I think if that game was a car, the RPMs would be in the 5,000, 6,000 range for the last part of that game. It was a shocker, and it was a heartbreaking game for us. But I just need you to know that for all of you that decided to send me an email, to send out a tweet, to some of you found a way to text message me, know that I am appreciative of you supporting the show, but I hate your guts no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But I did feel it necessary for me to eat crow right now and know that my Predators have lost. And now I am, I don't know what to do with myself, Chelsey.
Just become a Stars fan. It's the easiest thing to do.
No, I had this thing, it's this thing called character. And I mean, I've got to be loyal to my team. And so I can't just shift my loyalties simply just because my team's no longer in the playoffs right now. So I don't know what I'm going to do right now. I might take up knitting during the rest of it. No, actually, there's no part of me that can knit. I don't have that kind of hand-eye coordination, but I did feel the need to be able to eat crow in this particular moment. And isn't it, I don't know if you all have picked up on this, especially since we're in a Dallas market right now, but it seems as though there's a great energy here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area for the Dallas Stars. Are you picking up on that, Chelsey?
Well, there always has been a pretty loyal following growing up in the area.
Okay.
Yeah. We, I think we lost our team for a few years when we were growing up, and we've been really, really good up until that point. Mike Madonna, ring a bell. So Yeah, since they went away and came back, I think the cult following was strong.
Okay. Hey, David, have you picked up on there is a palpable energy right now. It seems as though in the Dallas-Fort Worth area for the Stars, and I've never picked up on that before. And maybe perhaps I'm just more sensitive to it now because I've suffered defeat, and defeat has a way of humbling you and helping you acknowledge all that is around you. But I just think like there's an energy here in the area right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could definitely, everywhere you go, everyone's always bringing up, oh, did you see that game last night or the other day, But the Dallas Stars. Yeah.
So you all will appreciate this, and then we'll have to go to a break after this. I had to guest lecture over at Dallas Baptist on Tuesday morning. And so the game was a pretty late night game. It went until about 11:30 or so, and I had to lecture the next morning. And so what the professor put a quiz before me. He told me that I had to administer a quiz to his class, which is just kind of a frustrating thing if you're a guest lecturer. You just want to be the guy that comes in and gives a talk, and then you can leave. And so my spirit's down, I'm sullen, I'm vexed, one might say. And so I'm going into this classroom, and lo and behold, I know that I've got to administer this quiz, but there are a couple of guys wearing Dallas Stars hats after I've just suffered defeat. And so this is my time to speak up and feel empowered after I have been humiliated. So I tell them they can either take off their cap and take the quiz, or they can keep their cap on and take an F. No, I'm just kidding. And then I laughed at them, and I was like, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that. But I don't like you right now. But here's the quiz. But nevertheless, yes, we are going to have to take a break here shortly. But know that when we come back from the break, one of the things that I'm really interested in talking about right now is specifically the sacred cow that is abortion. For those of you that are supporters of Point of View, here shortly you will be getting Outlook magazine, which comes when you offer your support of Point of View. And I'm writing an article right now on Unplanned, the movie, that really does highlight the abortion industry. And I've never been more perplexed by the lengths that the culture is willing to go to silence the life issue. And the more research that I've done around this for this article, the more perplexed I am about the whys and the hows. Specifically, why is abortion such a golden calf for the larger culture, and then how we might be able to move forward. Just being completely honest with you all, one of the things that I'm a little frustrated by is it's one thing to be able to identify wrong, and I think that's what the right has done for so long, and I'm so grateful that we've been able to call wrong for wrong and right for right. But I'm trying to figure out now, how do we move forward simply away from a position of identifying wrong? I think William Buckley did this really well when he decided that when he wrote God and Man at Yale in the 1950s, he identified the intolerant tolerance in the Ivy Leagues. And so one of the ways that he, in response to that, he decided that he would create Young Americans for Freedom. He would create the National Review. He would go on and create certain institutions to be able to perpetuate the values that he believed undergirded our society. And so there was this institutional building. But the more and more I see the silencing of our culture around the abortion issue, I can't help but think we've identified the problem, but what is the solution to this? And so when we get back from the break, we're going to be talking a little bit about that, but we'd welcome your phone calls too. 800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Executives from Facebook and Twitter testified on Capitol Hill 2 weeks ago. All the big tech companies deny that they are engaged in any censorship, but the members of the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee provided a number of examples. The executive from Twitter stressed that his platform does not use political viewpoints, perspective, or party affiliation in making decisions about content or rankings. The other executive wanted to state unequivocally that Facebook does not favor one political viewpoint over another, nor does Facebook suppress conservative speech. Senator Marsha Blackburn wanted to know why her pro-life ad was pulled during the 2018 campaign because Twitter deemed it inflammatory. It is worth noting that she did receive an apology from the executive, who added that they made a mistake on your ad. Senator Ted Cruz pointed to a Susan B. Anthony list ad that was banned, added a picture of Mother Teresa with her quote, "Abortion is profoundly anti-woman." At the top of the poster in the committee room was the word censored. Chuck Konselman is the writer and director of the movie Unplanned. He told his story of the obstacles he faced in marketing the movie through Google and Twitter. He did give credit to Facebook as the one social media platform where he didn't have problems. Senator Cruz also warned that antitrust laws might eventually be used on the big tech companies if things don't change. He noted that these big tech companies are larger and more powerful than when Standard Oil was broken up, and larger and more powerful than AT&T when it was broken up. Some Democratic members of the subcommittee believe that charges of censorship are baseless, but I don't know how you could say that with all the examples that were cited. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From 20th Century Fox and Franklin Entertainment, Breakthrough, starring Chrissy Metz, based on a true story. Breakthrough, rated PG, now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you decided to join us for this Wednesday, which is also known as National Taking a Chance Day. And so there was, you got to risk it to get the biscuit, y'all.
As a 7 on the Enneagram, I should really know about today.
Oh, goodness.
David like visibly rolled his eyes just now. For
God.
those of you who
So
can't
here's
see.
the thing, though. Like I'm very fascinated by this research. There's certain research on risk, and so one of the studies that always like captivates my attention is this study that was put out by this economist. He found over 20,000 people that were facing a significant decision. Okay, so significant decision being a move, a vocation change, engagement, some significant decision that they were facing, and they had to make a decision. They could either say yes to it, take the risk, or say no, keep the status quo. And what he found is after all 20,000 of those people, through just a coin flip, they would say yes or no. What he found is the individuals that got the heads and took the risk and said yes to the risk experienced a greater level of happiness than those that didn't take the risk.
Oh, I totally believe that.
So it's to the extent of we're just very risk averse now, and we need to risk it to get the biscuit, right? Like even in the biblical, here's my argument from the biblical narrative. I mean, you see Jesus, and Jesus says that the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which man finds and sells everything that he has. He risked all his stuff to be able to get the treasure hidden in a field. What did Jesus again say? He says, put down your nets yet again, risk it on the other side of the boat. Like you got to risk it to get the communal biscuit, y'all. I just think
so
you've
anxious,
got,
man. You get so anxious on the coin flip.
Yeah, you got to risk it to get the biscuit.
I would probably prefer to make all of my life decisions that way and have
Like,
no
all right.
responsibility for it whatsoever.
That's funny. That's funny. Well, one of the programming note that I feel the need to be able to share with you all. Many of you are aware that the Millennial Roundtable is moving. Yes, that's right. It is moving. It's moving away from the moving away from Wednesdays, and we're going to be changing it to Tuesdays starting on May 7th. And so you'll get the same corny jokes and the same corny voice and hopefully a little bit slower. I'm trying to talk a little bit slower as well. But we are going to be moving it to Tuesday starting on May 7th. And so please feel free to follow us. And if you are a friend, we definitely want you to follow us. If you're an enemy, we especially want you to follow us as we make our way to Tuesday. And so kind of moving forward, one of the things that we talked about over the break, leading up to the break rather, is just this move movie Unplanned. Unplanned, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is a movie that centers on one woman as she once worked at Planned Parenthood, achieved great levels of success at Planned Parenthood, experienced promotions at Planned Parenthood, became aware of what was actually happening at Planned Parenthood, saw the atrocities that were happening at this place, and decided to leave. And who was once an individual that was a fierce advocate for the pro-choice position now becomes an even greater advocate for the pro-life position. And this movie is documenting that story. And what we know about stories from the biblical narrative, as well as just anecdotally, is that stories are powerful. The power of the testimony cannot be defeated. And one of the things that we see is that it is experiencing great levels of success at the box office, almost doubling the amount that it anticipated on that first opening weekend. We're thinking that there was only going to be around 2 million. I believe it took in around 6 million. So experienced great levels of success at the first weekend, but also one of the things that it also experienced was some blowback as well. And Chelsey, you've been in and around this issue for quite a bit. This is something that I know you're significantly passionate about, sacrifice for, you're bought in on. There was the pushback had to do with the culture, everything from the Twitter, their Twitter feed was their tweets were being blocked to a large degree, as well as their followers were being erased to a large degree. They just experienced a great level of difficulty, despite the fact that Twitter rarely has that type of difficulty with any other account. And
well,
so
I have a study that actually shows otherwise. But
so help us understand this. Like, one, just from the pro-life side, but also two, it seems like certain social media entities, certain media entities are just allergic to the life issue and anything that will perpetuate the humanity of the child that's growing inside of a pregnant woman.
Right. So, one thing I always say, to probably the offense of many people, is that the pro-abortion movement has been selling a bill of lies for years. It is all based on lies. The lie that a woman really has a choice, the lie that choice should really only be one thing, and that's abortion, when there are adoption options out there, or maybe she could be a perfectly adequate mother and parent, and they could find ways to empower her and enable her to do so. They've been telling the lie that they're pro-woman, and that's adamantly not true. And so I think what happens is when the pro-life movement starts to reveal these and deal with abortion on its terms, which is what this movie does, it says, anyone you talk to or debate that is pro-choice is not dealing with abortion on its terms. They'll move the ball. They'll talk about all other types of topics, but they're not talking about what the physical act of abortion is, that it is the ending of a life, and that there's medical trauma involved for the mother in addition to that. Okay. So they pull smoke and mirrors. They don't tell the women all the information. This was really highlighted in the movie, which, by the way, everything in the movie is true. It's not fiction. They say, don't worry about anything. We'll take care of you. They don't give her any information, not even a sonogram. And they do what they call is just a procedure, which actually ends up being pretty traumatic to a lot of women. And all that being said, to answer your question, I think when those lies are called into question and the pro-life movement starts dealing with abortion on its terms, with the truth and the reality that abortion is and the impact it has on our children and women, they don't know how to deal with it. And so they use alternatives to fight that message, to shut it down, and to shut down really truth and a meaningful debate.
Do you think they shut down that side, or do you think they just overemphasize their side? So like what I always think
in the case of Twitter, they physically shut down the account. So that's what I thought you were referring to.
Good point. So I think that's one of the things that I'm so perplexed by. And I've tried to ask my pro-choice friends this. And it's hard for me to walk away with it. And I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on it. Because on the pro-life side, it's so obvious. There's usually the term murder comes up. Usually the term taking of a life comes up. That's the emphasis on the pro.
Well, be careful saying usually, because I think that there are a million different strategies out there on the pro-life side.
Yeah, there's the main arguments I would put forward are always involve the emphasis upon the taking of life. and more often than not, I would say that the term murder is often used very colloquially among individuals that are arguing for the pro-life side. Whereas on the pro-choice side, it's much more of we want to give autonomy to the woman. We want the woman to be able to have the choice. So how do you, like, I would be interested to know, not simply just the idea, because I'm lock and sold on the idea that it is killing a child. You're killing a child. Like, I think we can all agree with that.
It's ending a life.
Yeah, you are
Right.
ending a life. How do you persuade somebody, not simply just identify where they're wrong? How do you persuade somebody utilizing the framework of a woman has a choice in this instance? How do you persuade them to use their choice in such a way that doesn't require the ending of a particular life?
Sure. So I think a few things to know. I would just fundamentally disagree with you that people
Okay.
throw around the phrase murder relating to this
Okay.
issue. I've actually never really heard that spoken about in my circles. So that's not really
It's just
a term.
an indictment on my friends.
But let's say, to answer your question, I think it begins with an acknowledgement that this is a difficult situation for the woman. So the answers might not be easy, right? There are going to be difficult decisions to be made. Keeping the child, is an abortion an option? How can we better her circumstances? But I think what you're saying when you're referring to the right for a woman to choose discussion, there really isn't much of a choice in that. It ends a life. There's no real choice, and she's expected to pick up the pieces without a support system. And the truth is, really, real woman empowerment is telling someone you can do this, that you are capable. Yeah. And this is what the pro-life movement does so well: is they come around a woman, they create a support system, they meet not just her physical medical needs, but they often connect her with churches and mentors and create an emotionally unstable environment. I'm working with a client right now on a wonderful program they've created that identifies everything from domestic violence abuse issues to helps them get food stamps if they need to help women get on their feet. And that's pro-woman. That is pro-solving the situation. There are positive solutions out there. That doesn't take away from the difficulty or the emotional side she might be dealing with, but there are ways to really come around and empower a woman to make a better choice.
Yeah, I'm captivated by it because, again, I'm always going back. I'm often going back right now to the book The Moral Divide by Jonathan Haidt, and so addressing the argument on its own terms, and so not simply just trying to start from two different places, but just try to start on their terms and bring them to our side. If I'm making sense right now.
Start on their terms.
Start on their terms. So we place a primary emphasis and a premium emphasis on the ability of the woman to be able to choose. So instead of starting from a position of this is the ending of a life, I'm starting from a position of I highly value a woman's choice in this. And then how do you move them from highly valuing a woman's choice to being just as valuable and seeing the value and the worth of the child to keep the child alive and making that choice instead of simply just removing or ending the child's life? We've got to go to a break, but when we come back from the break, Girien Salazer.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
for listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable here in studio by David Fraga and Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. And now joined over the phone by the one and only Girien Salazer. Girien, how are you?
Hey, Nick. Good afternoon. It's great to join you, Chelsey, and David on the show today.
So good to have you. But before we go ahead and get started, there's two pieces of information that we have to discuss right now.
I know what's coming.
I know. You know what's coming. You know what's coming. So let's just talk. Do you want to start off with the good news or the bad news? I'll let you have that choice.
Well, I'll let you start. This is your show, Nick.
Okay. If you insist. You're so deferential. Okay, so let's talk about 25 years ago, April 24th, 1994. The Admiral, David Robinson, drops 71 points to secure the right to become the NBA scoring champion for the 1994 season. Man, what a giant of a man. Am I right?
Yeah, he's pretty impressive. He's a great person for the city of San Antonio. We just love him there.
He is the absolute man. Okay, that was the good news. Now let's slide into the bad news a little bit. What's happening with y'all, man?
Hey,
For our listeners, just to give a little context, Girien is with the Faith and Education Coalition, but is also a pretty diehard Spurs fan. Am I correct in that assessment?
That is the best assessment you could ever make of me. That's my role, and then I'm a Spurs fan. Right?
So the Spurs, for those that have been following along with NBA playoffs, find themselves in the first round right now, down 2-3 rather, against the Denver Nuggets. And they lost last night, 90-108. And Girien, I don't know if there's ash still on your head right now. I don't know if you have the Burlite sackcloth on you. What's happening with the Spurs right now? What needs to change?
Fortunately, I was teaching the class last night, so I missed the entire first half going into the third quarter. I Googled the score, and I knew that I was not going to be watching the highlights. But I don't know what's happening. I know there's just some shifting that's got to happen. We don't have a 3-point barrage from our team, but I think we've got to play some solid D. Yep. And we're not doing that well.
Yeah, that's a frustrating thing to say, the very least. Kind of transitioning over to another sport. As you know, I'm a pretty big Predators fan, and I think our defense failed to make the trips to Dallas each time we came and played here. But nevertheless, I am a devoted Preds fan, concerned Preds fan, and I know that you are no fair weather Spurs fan. And so we wish the Spurs all the best, because I have to be with my brother, who's also a Spurs fan, over the weekend. And if my brother's not happy, ain't nobody happy. He's like multiplying by times 0. He tends to dominate the tenor. But nevertheless, Girien, you are with the Faith and Education Coalition. There's a couple of things that I want to address with you, specifically with some of the articles that are coming out right now and some of the news that's kind of circulating around this space of specifically the Hispanic population, as well as education, higher education, with an emphasis upon that. Yeah. And one of the things that I'd love to be able to hear your thoughts on is the research that just came out with the title "Show Me the Data Report." And so there's 5 highlights that I think are pretty important. And for our listeners, if you'd like to find out more information on the Faith and Education Coalition, as well as what the work Gideon's doing and this report, you can go on to our website at pointofview.net. Again, that website is pointofview.net, or you can make your way over to the Facebook page. We'll post those links in the show notes. But Girien, let's go back to it. So we got the Show Me the Data report. It's come out again, and you really have highlighted 5 in particular parts that are really important for us to understand, especially as we consider the work of the Faith and Education Coalition, as well as individuals that are concerned about education, as well as the Christian faith.
Yeah, Nick, our work with the Faith and Education Coalition, with the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference, has been to give our pastors useful data, useful information that can help them to be advocates in their communities for public education, to advocate for education equity, to advocate for resources that would help their students graduate college and career ready. And so what the Data Quality Campaign found in their assessment of state report cards was just that, state report cards are a great place for advocacy groups, people like me, people, that care about education, for them to go to be able to look at what's happening in their state. how are Hispanics performing? How are African Americans performing? How are our students performing overall? What areas do we need to see improvement in? And so they did a great job of pulling together this report of state report cards and exactly just how well they are presenting the information that they should be presenting and ways that they could improve. And this is just, highly important as we consider especially this discussion of how we need to hold our states accountable for the education that they provide students.
And so here's one of you've highlighted 5 in particular parts of the data report. But one thing, the second one just jumps out at me that I think would just be so significant, and I'd love for you to be able to elaborate upon, is this: 35 states do not translate report cards into languages other than English. It's really hard, I would imagine, for a parent to be engaged with their student if they do not know how their student is doing in the classroom, right?
Yeah. And that's one of the things that we advocate for is we want our parents to be engaged in their child's education. And, when a report card comes home or any information comes home to the parent and it's not in their language, how can we expect that parent to engage with the child's teacher? How can we expect that parent to engage with their child's school? I think about the community that we serve, the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference, and the majority of the pastors I speak with, I never speak to them in English. I speak to them in Spanish. And so I think if we want our parents to be engaged, but also if we want them to be able to have information and be able to go back to their teachers and say, hey, why are our students performing in this manner with relation to this subject, to English or math? They cannot do that if they are not able to engage in the dialogue or understand the dialogue that's happening around them if it's not in their language. So it is concerning, but it is positive note to see that 35 states are doing it. But, I can't imagine that 15 other states, the District of Columbia as well, do not have other ethnic groups whose primary language is not English who would love to be able to be engaged in education. Even more so.
There's a multitude. There's just a multitude of things that can spin off from this because really, when you think about it, a teacher really does need to be the parent to be involved. A teacher is an essential ingredient. The parent is the secret sauce to a student's success. The not so secret, I probably should say, the not so secret sauce to a student's success. When a parent is involved, not only does research indicate that when a parent is involved, a student is more likely to achieve inside the classroom and then character development outside the classroom, success in life, but also the whole school experiences a tide that raises all boats. And so when you have an opportunity for a parent to be able to know where their student is going and how their student is doing, it can be really helpful, which also brings me to the fourth point. You say that only 31 states have mobile-friendly report cards. In a world in which we're just living in front of a phone, we're living interconnected to the internet, it seems like this is a very easy way for states to be able to move the ball forward and empower parents to be able to help not only their students, but also the teachers in the school as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nick, and one of the things that has surprised me just in the context I've had with a lot of Hispanic families is, some of them don't have a home computer. Mm-hmm. Some of them, they fill out their FAFSA on their phone. They look up, different things. They look up items on their phone. And so it is a primary place for them to be able to access data, to be able to engage with the broader world. And so I think it's just a simple thing that can be done. States can do this. They can have the report cards to be mobile friendly so that anybody, no matter where they're at, they can just click on the phone and be able to evaluate how well their states are doing. So very important.
So help me understand this first point before we have to go to a break. I'd be really interested when we look at this. And so you say that 25 states, or the report says that 25 states do not include required data on the number of inexperienced teachers. Help us to know the significance of that.
Well, Nick, you talked about the teacher being a significant portion in the child's development and their learning process. In fact, it's one of the most important things that they have a quality teacher, someone who has experience of being able to raise the aptitude and the grades of some of these students. And so when districts and schools are continually attracting teachers who only have 1 year experience, 2 years of experience, just coming out of college, not that these teachers aren't capable of teaching, but oftentimes it is the the districts that have the lower scores already, the districts that have marginalized students, the districts that already have lower grades in comparison to other districts. And so we need this to be able to evaluate how well are these districts attracting, being able to attract experienced teachers.
Yeah.
How well are they being able to retain these experienced teachers, and are the teachers developing? Are they becoming successful? And
Exactly.
so it's an important data point.
Yep. Well, we've got to go to a break, but when we come back from the break, we'll still continue to talk with Girien Salazer of the Faith in Education Coalition, a part of Dallas Baptist University, as well as National Hispanic Christian Leadership Council. We'll be back, though, right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. We've covered the practice of Kaporos on this program before. If you've forgotten, Kaporos is a sacred religious ceremony performed by Orthodox Jewish congregations for several millennia. In the ceremony, which takes place during the holiest days of the Jewish calendar, the atonement of sins is contemplated through prayer and the kosher and humane killing of a chicken. But as we've discussed previously, animal rights activists in California sued to force government officials to prohibit the ceremony. First Liberty attorneys argued that it's not the role of the government to tell religious communities how to peacefully exercise their religious beliefs. In fact, over the last few years, First Liberty and our network attorneys have successfully defended the Chabad of Irvine, a small synagogue in Orange County, California, against 2 lawsuits brought by activists opposed to Kaporos. But of course, the animal rights activists appealed the dismissal of 1 lawsuit to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. Well, about a week after oral argument, the Ninth Circuit came out with its decision. Its conclusion? That the animal rights groups didn't even have the legal ability to bring the lawsuit in the first place. While it was decided on procedural grounds, the court's decision brings a resounding conclusion to several years of harassment by lawsuit of a peaceful religious practice. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by David Fraga here, as well as Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. And over on the phone right now, we have been talking with Girien Salazer of the Faith in Education Coalition. Specifically, we have been talking about the recent report that came out that was highlighted on their website relative to kind of some of the educational standards and some of the work that he is doing, and specifically a lot of attention we were giving kind of our conversation towards was around report cards and the need for states to be able to translate report cards or provide a translation of a report card into Spanish to empower the parent to be able to help their student, which in turn would be the tide that raises the entire school. Well, Gideon, I also want to talk about something else that you have given attention to on our end is how 2020, the Democratic candidates are starting to outline positions on tackling student debt as well. All of us are one of those millennials that are student debt accumulating, Snapchatting, Uber riding, selfie taking millennials that are commitment phobic. But one of those commitments that we cannot get away from is student debt. And so help us to understand this student debt conversation that's happening in the 2020 election, and specifically give emphasis upon the NACLC as well as the FEC, your viewpoint from the vantage.
Oh, of course, Nick. I think one of the mottos that I hate to admit was, I think a motto is always defer, right? If I can get enrolled half-time at an institution, I can defer. It is a troubling, I say troubling, but it was an investment that we make, to take out those loans so that we can, Lord willing, be able to invest in our future, invest in the future of our kids by providing educational opportunities that otherwise would not be available. I know my parents do not make enough money to send all four of my brothers and sisters to college, but we did take advantage of grants, and I took advantage of student loans to continue on with my graduate work. And so it is, I think one of the more startling, or not startling, but I guess you would say one of the biggest headlines with this is about, I think Elizabeth Warren wanting to eliminate, some $1.5 trillion, some people saying $640 billion of student debt. If you fall into his income bracket, you don't have to pay back a certain amount of your loans. And, that's a pretty bold statement to make, but I think that, they're appealing to a certain group of people. Yeah, I think millennials, I think they're appealing to us. Mm-hmm. Bernie Sanders has always been a pro, we want college to be free for any and everyone. And so, I think they're making a strong appeal to the group of millennials, to the group of students, lifelong learners. But I would love to get Chelsey and David's thoughts on this. I remember a movie with Jack Black, Envy, and they invented that spray, and it made the poo go away. I don't know if you remember this. And the big question was, where does it go? And so I think about that. So the $640 billion, that, take it away. But I ask myself the question, where does it go? And I think that's just the question that comes to mind is what does this affect, and how many institutions are going to be impacted by the ability just to even say, hey, don't worry about that, so that's just my take on that. But
yeah, because I am just so convinced, I'm just so perplexed by this, just because I'm keenly aware that there are a number of students that are getting college loans right now that are going to school. Mm-hmm. I think somewhere around the average is like $34,000 to $36,000 that students are if they're graduating from college, are carrying around this type of debt. I think I've heard Kevin Williamson over at National Review had a piece out that said the government just needs to completely get out of that. I saw a Bloomberg article that I sent to a buddy of mine that showed how there's a school called, I think the Lambda School or Lambda College up in the Northeast that is asking investors to invest in students. And then in turn, they don't pay for school, but they get a portion of their pay once they leave school. So because at the end of the day, that's what a loan is. A loan is a risk, and these are investors that are looking at those raw qualities. Can this school hone and help those qualities in order that they might be able to make a profit once the student leaves the school? David, your thoughts on this idea of government coming in and offering up this debt reduction to student loans? I think we can all agree that student loans are an issue to wrestle with right now. I don't know if this solution is necessarily the most beneficial.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that being the best solution, because obviously if you have the government trying to get involved with a lot of those areas economically, it could really take a toll of the nation so many different ways. But what I do hear about a lot is that there are organizations coming in and offering scholarships to say, hey, we'll pay for everything for your education if you come make a 3-year commitment at our organization. I've heard that, and think Ernest & Young does that.
Yeah.
And a few other organizations that do that as well. Kind of like the investor side of things it's the same thing. They're making an investment on these individuals where they see potential, have been tested, quote unquote tested, to go to a university, get a degree, get paid, and then obviously commit to work for them.
Yeah, so I think the research is clear that for a large contingent, I think the vast majority of individuals, if they go to college, they increase their earning power significantly over a lifetime. So we do know that there is value in going to school. I'm always a little bit prone, just because I'm always a little bit hesitant, just because I know certain individuals aren't necessarily suited. Their skill sets are more suited to be able to go straight into the workforce. Their skill sets are more suited to do something to learn a particular trade instead of getting back into the classroom. So I'm open to that, but I just don't think that removing the value of education by alleviating the debt is necessarily the right thing to do in this moment.
Yeah.
I just think that you missed out on a great opportunity, especially in this changing environment. Gideon, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on this, just because, I mean, who would have thought 20 years ago that Google would employ hundreds of thousands? Like Google, 20, 30 years ago, it was GE that was employing all of these individuals. There's this innovation that's happening right now that it requires us not simply to give an emphasis upon learning from 5 years old till we're 18 or 21 if you go to college, 22 if you go to college, but to become more lifelong learners, because so many of the workers are starting to transition jobs every 4.7 years, according to the research.
Well, Nick, I think you're right, and it's going to take some creative solutions. One of the things that we continue to advocate for is we want our states in their public education system is really to be forward-looking and to look down, the line and say, this is a changing society. This is a shifting economic place we're in right now, and so how can we prepare our students for it? We need to look at conventional ways, but also unconventional ways, so that when they get when they're out of high school, they can make that choice as to what's going to be best for them. Is college the best choice, or is a career the best choice? But either way, we want them to be prepared either way they go.
And I think that's what's so important about what the FEC is doing, is it really is coming alongside students to help them be better prepared once they leave high school. Tell our listening audience, Gideon, one more time where they can find out more information about the Faith and Education Coalition.
Yeah, you can visit www.faithandeducation.com, or you can text the word member to 345-345. That's, again, the word member to 345-345, and you can get more information on the work of the Faith and Education Coalition.
Well, Gideon, thank you so much for joining us. And before we leave, we just have to say, go Spurs. Go Spurs, go.
Spurs, go.
Well, Gideon, thank you so much. Now, we have got to take a break, but when we come back from the break, we're going to be talking a little bit about the ongoing tragedy of what's happening in Sri Lanka right now. More news has come out relative to just kind of the tragedy that happened on Easter. We'll be talking about that, potential links to ISIS, and more. But we've got to take a break right now, and we will be back right after this with more of the Millennial Roundtable.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, April 24th, 2019 day. My name is Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us for this Point of View, the Millennial Roundtable. Here, coming up on our second hour. For our first hour was in Dallas and Minnesota, and now we are nationwide right now. And so welcome and to our new audience as well. To catch you up on what we have been talking about specifically, we just had Girien Salazer of the Faith and Education Coalition with us over the phone. He was sharing with us a little bit about some of the new report card standards that had come out relative to some of the work that he does between the Hispanic population as well as higher education and the need for opportunities, I should say, for improvement. Let's think about it from a positive perspective. And so we were talking a little bit about that. And then we also talked about, during the first hour, the movie Unplanned. And so we tried to, Chelsey and I, in a shocking twist, spend a little bit of time arguing over how we might be able to, one, understand why it is that abortion has become such a sacred cow here in the U.S. And then two, for those of us that are of the pro-life persuasion, how do we move the needle in such a way that we can build upon the decreases that have been happening of abortions here in the U.S. as well. And so now during the second hour, we're going to continue on some of those conversations. Specifically, we're going to give time to the movie Unplanned, largely because for those of you that are supporters of Point of View, you will receive an Outlook magazine. And in that Outlook magazine, once a month, it has articles that focus around a particular topic. And this month, one of those will center around the abortion issue. And I will be writing an article for that. And I know that one of our publishers is listening in right now, and I promise that article will eventually come from me. And so I'm hoping maybe I'll get some insight in our discussion as well about this. And so
I'll just ghostwrite it for you.
Yeah, thank you. You won't hear from me. I'm just going to ask Chelsey questions and then just type along the answer to try. Because again, I think we can be honest. I was talking to a friend last night, and I think that there's got to be a better way to frame this conversation to move more people away from the option of abortion. And maybe it's the persistent stubbornness inside of me. I am persistently stubborn to try to find a better way. And so Chelsey's rolling her eyes at me.
No, I didn't roll them per se.
She didn't roll them as much as normal. I
thought I had like a really good controlled expression there.
And so we're going to be talking a little bit about Unplanned, and I'm going to try to get a better understanding of the issue as well as just go back and forth with you all. And then, of course, we need to talk about what's happened in Sri Lanka as well. And so that's where we'll kick off. But before we kick off, just know that we are going to be highly welcoming of your phone calls. So if you'd like to call in and contribute your point of view, you can do so by calling in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And when you see the live feed, you can leave a comment underneath that live moving picture, also known as a video, and what you share online we'll try to get to over air as well. And so continuing to move forward, let's shift gears and talk a little bit about the tragedy that emerged out of Sri Lanka on Easter Sunday. On Easter Sunday, now the death toll has risen of upwards of 350 people have lost their lives. A coordinated terrorist attack, at least 8 bombs thus far that we know right now. There's just more information that continues to come out about this. At least eight bombings took place in churches and high-end hotels and other places across the country of Sri Lanka, taking the lives of 350 people. We know that this was just a tragedy that has rocked this nation, that just recently came out of a civil war as well. And now, just recently, within the past day, we have found out that the group that coordinated some of these bombings was working with ISIS. And so ISIS, of course, as you know, a large part of their contingency, their operating base was out of Syria and Iraq. And the U.S. forces have done a significant job to be able to remove those forces and really defeat those forces in Syria and Iraq. But the tragic thing about ISIS is it's not simply just the ground that they possess, but it's also the ideology that they hold. And that ideology has a propensity to radicalize to the extent that they can rationalize individuals committing these mass atrocities in the name of Islam. And so, Chelsey, when you hear about this on a day that we celebrate resurrection, and to hear about persecution on such a great level, it just is disheartening, to say the very least.
Yes, it's disheartening and very tragic, but I just am hopeful that the martyrs, they died for their Christian beliefs, they died because of their Christian identity, that they're in heaven and away from, that pain and suffering, and, God willing, they've received their reward today. And so, while it's definitely tragic, we as Christians have hope beyond the tragedy and sin in this world, and terrible acts in this world. With that said, that doesn't mean that we don't still have work here to do on behalf of our other brothers and sisters across the globe who are facing a tremendous amount of persecution, and increasingly so over the last few years, more physical endangerment than ever, more deaths than ever. And a lot of it is at the hands of ISIS. One of the biggest parts about this that was tragic to me was that I think some of the government officials had some tips that there was a terrorist attack in the making. And so the fact that it couldn't have been prevented, makes this all the more difficult and sad to me.
Yeah, India has a pretty sizable and pretty powerful intelligence gathering agency, and Indian officials had alerted Sri Lankan officials to this, but it didn't seem to be able to translate to any transferable action or prevention to keep this from happening. And David, she brings up a really great point in that that persecution is on the rise. You wouldn't know it if you would have just been watching some certain news entities, but what you continue to see is that Christians are the most persecuted religious people group of any religious people group in the entire world. Right now, every month, 365 Christians die for faith-related reasons. Over 105 buildings or structures are bombed or attacked every month, according to Open Doors USA. There is a significant level of persecution that happens to Christians, but Christians can also take heart as well, right, David? Just because even though man can destroy the body, they cannot touch the soul.
Exactly. And, probably one of the most popular songs is that song Living Hope, right? It's just like he is our living hope, and that we do have that hope, kind of like what Chelsey was talking about, that these are Christians who died in what they believe, but we have the hope that we will see them one day in heaven, right? And it's one of those things that, man, you're just like, why is this all happening in this time period? Why is there so much hate? Why is there all this destruction? But it's just only pointing to the sign of the times, right? And it's just, it's sad, just that retaliation and hate.
So we would love to hear from you. We've got to go to a break right now. And so if you'd like to offer up your question or comment, you can do so at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can make your way over to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Share your question or comment online, and what you share online we'll try to get to over air. When we come back, more on Sri Lanka right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Executives from Facebook and Twitter testified on Capitol Hill 2 weeks ago. All the big tech companies deny that they are engaged in any censorship, but the members of the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee provided a number of examples. The executive from Twitter stressed that his platform does not use political viewpoints, perspective, or party affiliation in making decisions about content or rankings. The other executive wanted to state unequivocally that Facebook does not favor one political viewpoint over another, nor does Facebook suppress conservative speech. Senator Marsha Blackburn wanted to know why her pro-life ad was pulled during the 2018 campaign because Twitter deemed it inflammatory. It is worth noting that she did receive an apology from the executive, who added that they made a mistake on your ad. Senator Ted Cruz pointed to a Susan B. Anthony list ad that was banned, added a picture of Mother Teresa with her quote, "Abortion is profoundly anti-woman." At the top of the poster in the committee room was the word censored. Chuck Konselman is the writer and director of the movie Unplanned. He told his story of the obstacles he faced in marketing the movie through Google and Twitter. He did give credit to Facebook as the one social media platform where he didn't have problems. Senator Cruz also warned that antitrust laws might eventually be used on the big tech companies if things don't change. He noted that these big tech companies are larger and more powerful than when Standard Oil was broken up, and larger and more powerful than AT&T when it was broken up. Some Democratic members of the subcommittee believe that charges of censorship are baseless, but I don't know how you could say that with all the examples that were cited. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From 20th Century Fox and Franklin Entertainment, Breakthrough, starring Chrissy Metz, based on a true story. Breakthrough, rated PG, now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts. On this Wednesday, April 24th, 2019 day, we have been talking a little bit about ISIS right now, and news that has just come out that ISIS has been coordinating with local officials in Sri Lanka to be able, or really not officials, local terrorists in Sri Lanka to be able to cause this mass destruction. And now the death toll has risen to 350 people. But I think what is so interesting when we consider what's happening in Sri Lanka right now is the significance of what's happened to it, and also ISIS's capability in this as well. Now, for those of you that have been following along with ISIS, one of the things that makes them so detrimental is just the stranglehold they had in Syria and Iraq to be able to shut down what was known as this bedrock place where Christianity began to flourish and thrive. It was the birthplace of Christianity. And because it was a birthplace, you saw all of these landmarks and all of these markers get destroyed through ISIS by what was known as historicide. And so they would destroy all of these museums. They would destroy this architecture that had been around for years that really did document the beginnings of Christianity, and ISIS would destroy that. And it was known as historicide. But now what we're seeing is they're shifting away as they no longer have the hold in Iraq and Syria. Is now we're seeing them kind of export their terror across the world. Numbers indicate that 15 to 20,000 ISIS sleeper cells operate now all throughout the world. And what we knew is that there's around 5,600 of these ISIS fighters have decided that once they lost the battle in Iraq and Syria, what they did is they went back home to their own home countries, which is the reason why I think many of us can remember back about a month ago where there was an ISIS mom that decided that she wanted to get entrance back into the country. I don't know if you remember this.
Yes, I do remember this.
Yeah, and it caused quite a controversy, if you'll remember, Chelsey.
Yes, it did. I mean, she wanted to regain her citizenship back, and obviously our ICE officials and immigration have a vested interest in not allowing known ISIS affiliates to return back to the country.
Yeah, and the idea that we even entertained it was just because, again, this is there's still so much to know about what happened in Sri Lanka right now, but from what we understand and from what we know, this is an individual that was trained by ISIS and but now has gone back to their home country, and how quickly the potential that they were able to make this upswing of they left ISIS, they left Syria or Iraq, and they were able to go and to be able to enact this terror and organize this. Because, I mean, this wasn't just I'm going to go cause some trouble one day. This was a coordinated attack of upwards of 8 bombs in separate locations. To now, I mean, when you think about, I can't do math on the fly because I took mathematical thought and practice in college, which indicates just my math skills. And so one of the things though is Sri Lanka only has 23 million people there. This death toll now is upwards of 350 people. Like, this is a sizable chunk. This is a sizable chunk of their population that ISIS has taken out. And so it just begs the question, what are some of the measures that need to be taken? And are the measures that were taken appropriate? And so this would be maybe the question for you is this. One of the measures that was taken is that Sri Lanka shut down social media in the aftermath of the bombing. Do you think that was a positive thing? Do you think it's a negative thing? Do you think there's something that they should have done?
Yeah, I'm not too sure about that.
Yeah.
Just because although we have talked in the past of how, influential social media is, and usually I think ISIS tries to have an account or whatever, but I don't think that the chatter there has a lot to do. Yeah. Personally, I don't think so personally. And, feel free to argue that because I have honestly.
Yeah. So Chelsey, I'd be interested in you. So the pros and cons of it is they decided they wanted to shut it down because there was so much misinformation that was spread in the immediate aftermath of the moment. And so, but also one of the things, they didn't want any coordination to happen between any other bombings. So they shut down social media. But also on the flip side is that was one of the ways to know their context is king. One of the ways that Sri Lankan officials were able to perpetuate harm in the war that they just came out of at a civil war was through some of those communication efforts. Because we have to remember that Sri Lanka is just 10 years ago was finding themselves in a bloody civil war. And so I'd be interested to know your perspective on that.
Well, there are obviously going to be valid security reasons and invalid reasons. So not liking the chatter after a terrorist attack is probably an invalid reason in my assessment. But a national security interest and an interest in knowing that the very tool that a terrorist group is using, maybe even actively to continue a coordinated attack, there might be a really, really compelling interest there for the state to shut it down. Yeah. So that's really a national security question, a question I think for experts, if we had some Pentagon guys on this to know, terrorism is such a different enemy than historical enemies during wartime. I mean, what is an insurgent? I mean, the Supreme Court heard this case years and years ago. How do we even define and classify a prisoner of war now? Because terrorists they're not wearing uniforms. They are a lot of times civilians, and the acts are carried out against civilians. Really, like, the human intelligence component of this is really important even in an IT age. And so there's a lot of natural obstacles and problems that make it very difficult to fight a terrorist enemy. One of which is they're not all even affiliated with the same nation state. Yeah. So it's like fighting the mafia in a sense, or really a ghost.
It really is.
They're not always coordinated in a way that they're easy to find and trace.
Yeah. So because David, I mean, she brings up a great point, because there used to be a day that you would just go declare war on a nation. Right? Exactly. It was we declared war on Iraq out of 9/11. But what we know is that Iraq was just a place that had a lot of people from Al Qaeda there, and we know that Al Qaeda had a hand in some of those terrorist attacks that happened. And now we're living in a world in which this is really these terrorists, they know no nation bounds. They find themselves, their greater allegiance is to their ideological extreme group. And so they're just happen to be habitating in particular nation states. But really what we saw with ISIS is it's not really limited to one either. Like they're living in Iraq and Syria, and they're getting taken. They're finding themselves a home in Nigeria with Boko Haram, and I think that's one of the things that I'm most worried about right now is the ability for them to be able to export and train individuals that are currently lone wolves or currently just small little groups, and allow them the opportunity to be able to amplify the terror. I think that's a reason for concern.
Yeah, absolutely, and. And that's kind of crazy to think about that, just because they do have, I guess you say, a direction and mission, obviously as being the state under Islam, right? Yeah. But all that being said, like how would one go about, if they do, capture someone who's from ISIS or something like that? Is it war crimes? Is it through a different nation that they attack? You know what I'm saying? Do they bring them back to the U.S. if they attack the U.S.? Do they bring them back to Sri Lanka, for example? I would ask you, like, how would that law go, per se, if they?
Well, I mean, we have jurisdiction,
yeah,
because there was Americans that died in this. It's upwards of 4 Americans that have died in these terrorist attacks, and so I don't know if we have an opportunity to be able to bring them back here, but I do know we have the propensity to be able to enact justice over there as well. Just because I think this is more of a reason. Another reason on a long list of reasons for us to continue to be involved and have a global touch and not be isolationist in nature, because terrorists are not bound to one particular place, and we don't want them coming here.
Right.
Yeah, I mean it's hard. Now we're into international
international
policies.
Yeah.
So it's hard because in one sense. We are in the war on terror.
Yeah.
We already are. And so we have a duty in my mind to finish that out. And I don't know that we will ever purge the world of terrorism.
No.
I don't think that's realistic, but we can marginalize it. We can cut off its resources. We can use our military and political power to really bring it to its knees. That would be the goal. I'm sure that there are ways to partner with Sri Lanka in that, and other nation states in that. Then there's some sovereignty questions. However, if we start to send troops everywhere, is that really a formal act of war? If so, Congress has to approve it. The president can't just do that unilaterally as commander in chief. But also there's a sovereignty question for the nations involved. So it's a difficult question. It depends.
Right.
And I'm sure our intelligence knows, is Sri Lanka a hotbed of ISIS activity? If so, maybe that does become a focal point.
Yeah.
Or if they're really stationed somewhere else and there are ways to marginalize them in places we're already currently located, maybe that's the answer. We really should just call the Pentagon and start asking them these questions.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we got to go to a break right now, but when we come back from the break, we'll continue talking a little bit more about Sri Lanka and then transition over to Ross Douthat, which I think has a pretty interesting piece on privileged persecuted that really pairs well with this. We will come back, though, right after this.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this Millennial Roundtable on Wednesday, April 24th, 2019. A commenting note, a programming note, I should say, a programming comment to bring them both together. And then also, let's celebrate what today is, April 24th. And so first, a programming note that the Millennial Roundtable that many of you are willing to put up with and endure will be moving to Tuesdays. Yes, that's right. We've been talking about it for the past couple of weeks. The Millennial Roundtable will be shifting to Tuesdays starting on May 7th. And so you will still hear some of the same millennial commentary with the same corny jokes and the same arguments between Chelsey and I going back and forth. On May 7th, we'll be shifting from Wednesdays to Tuesdays. And so we would highly encourage you not only to tune in, but to tell your friends. Instead of, what's the YouTube video, Chelsey? Hide your wife, hide your kids.
Hide your kids, hide your wife.
Hide your kids, hide your wife. Don't hide anybody. And encourage them to be able to tune in. And then the second thing being this. Wednesday, April 24th, 2019. This is a day we celebrate Take a Risk Day. That is right. So if you are a subscriber to the Daily Briefing, one of the things that you are aware of is I love to point out and identify what today is, what that day is. And today, due to probably some organizing body that decides that they want to give individuals a reason to celebrate, and I'm all for celebrating, is that today is Take a Risk Day. And so I have to highlight this study. I highlighted it during the first hour, and I just feel compelled to be able to do so this hour. So on Take a Risk Day, there was a study that was put out by an economist. An economist reached out to individuals that were facing a significant decision. They were having to weigh a really significant decision in their life. They were either thinking about transitioning jobs, they were thinking about making a move. They were thinking about taking it to another level with their girlfriend, boyfriend, et cetera. They're thinking about getting married, et cetera. So they had a big decision that they had, but they felt constrained in the midst of that decision, knowing that they could either go yes and take the risk or no, stick with the status quo. But this economist identified these individuals not simply because they faced a significant decision, but also they were willing to let a coin flip determine whether they decided to take the risk, heads, or stick to the status quo with the tails. And what was so fascinating about this study is it found that individuals that took the risk had a greater likelihood of being happier, essentially marking the conclusion that we need to risk it to get the biscuit. That as Christians, we come from a long line of individuals that have risked it to get the communal biscuit. You think about the kingdom of heaven being like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man finds and goes and hides again, and for everything, risks it and sells everything in order to purchase the field. We think about the disciples risking it by following after Jesus, leaving their business, leaving the fishing business, leaving the taxing business, leaving all their businesses to be able to follow after Jesus. We think about them risking it by putting their nets over on the other side, even though they had suffered utter defeat up until that point. They risked it to get the biscuit. And so if there is a word for you on this Wednesday, May 24th, 2019 day, take a risk it, and find the communal biscuit. And so I'm gonna broach the subject with the Millennial Roundtable now. Let's talk about risk for a little bit before we jump back into the conversations. And so I want to know, what is it when you think about some of the risks that you've taken in your life? What kind of peaks towards the top? Like for me, you've got something. Are you about to brim out something right now?
No.
Like when I think about the risks that were legal in nature, no, I'm just kidding. Not really. When I think about some of the risks that I think about, I always go back to leaving Tennessee to come here to Texas, to following the path that Davy Crockett took, and hopefully not going to suffer the same fate of being out here in Texas, of leaving family, friends, job opportunity, all of that, to come out here to go to seminary, and eventually for Texans to be able to lower their standards to allow somebody like me to stay out here. Like, I think about the weight of that risk now, and it seems very it's just always one of those humiliating moments where I'm like, man, that was a really good risk, but there was a lot on the line. Okay, and so I'm not going to call out either one of you, but Chelsey.
I knew that was coming.
When you think about a risk that you've taken in your life, you've risked it and got the biscuit. Tell me what you're thinking.
Well, I mentioned earlier on the program, I'm actually a 7 on the Enneagram. So any of our listeners who want to call in and talk to me about the Enneagram, I love the topic. But that person, the title given to 7s is the enthusiast, which means I've spent a lot of my life taking non-calculated risks, and I love it. At one point in college, I think I changed my major 3 times in my first year.
Okay.
At one point, my plan was to move to Costa Rica and start Young Life in Costa Rica.
Hey.
That did not pan out. My parents made me take the LSAT instead.
Okay. Similar.
Right. So, there are risks, but I think the biggest risk, similar to you, seriously, that I took that panned out was my downright refusal to even so much as intern in law school at a law firm. I only wanted to do public interest work. I really want to dedicate my life to serving the public. And so I worked for a government entity and I worked for nonprofits, but I just refused to do law firms, much to the dismay of my career counselor who lectured me incessantly about that. But it panned out because now I'm in the nonprofit world working cases and clients that really I think matter and are very much a ministry to me. So that was a pretty big risk coming out of law school to take on all that debt and not get paid. It's great.
Okay. Deal. Okay. David.
Oh, man.
Risked it to get the biscuit. Tell me.
Yeah. So I would say just over this past year, just taking one of the biggest risks, which is not moving back home and just kind of pursuing whatever the Lord has been calling me here in Dallas. Right. Okay. And it's been an adventure to say the very least, but because for me, I am a 1 wing 2 on the Enneagram, which means I love control. And I need to, I love details and I love to, control every single step of the day, per se. But the Lord's really been growing me out of that in order to show me, hey, I got some great things for you. I just need you to trust me and to release these things. So it's been a constant struggle, but in a good way. I think one of the biggest things, especially men's ministry, I have business degrees. That's what I was going to do. And, stepping into speaking into men's lives and just bringing them along and doing life with them, right? So I think that's one of the biggest risks right now. And,
So that's what you do. You risk it to get the biscuit. And so maybe that's not how Jesus would describe it, but I feel comfortable with that. And so with that also being said, I need to eat crow for a little bit. So if you'll indulge me, just for a short little time. We did this during the first hour as well, but we've got a different audience, so I feel the need to be able to share with you all that, as many of you know, being from Tennessee, it requires me to root for particular teams, and one of those teams being the Nashville Predators. Ride or dies, I will root for the Predators until I breathe my very last, Lord willing. And so I found myself in enemy territory being here in Dallas, and so over the past few weeks, we've been watching a series that spanned 6 games that ended with the Predators losing on Monday night. And the Lord has used that to bring humility within my spirit and also vindictiveness to my flesh. And so I have been eating crow as these Stars fans have been reminding me of how pathetic my Predators defense was. But I need you to know that we've got a great team here, and they made sure I was well aware of the Dallas Stars. And so if you're watching on Facebook right now, you can see Facebook or YouTube, you can see they put this Dallas Stars logo right here in my seat. And so I am being, experiencing a level of humility that usually accompanies me wherever I go, but is to an nth degree today. And so, nevertheless, we are going to have to take a break now, and we are going to transition back to the topics at hand when we come back from the break. And specifically, I want to give attention to what's happening in Sri Lanka right now to help us better understand some of the numbers and also some of the stories that have emerged out of Sri Lanka, because I think there's a lot of heart-wrenching stories, but it's also, we don't want to forget the most significant story that is coming out of Sri Lanka, that though this happened on resurrection, persecution happened amidst resurrection, but we don't just simply celebrate resurrection on Easter. we believe in resurrection as well. And we know that Jesus is the author of this story, and that at times that he allows evil, but he can redeem evil as well for his good and kind purposes. We've seen that all throughout history, and time will tell how we see how God can redeem this tragedy to bring about his glory as well. And so we'll share some more stories that have been coming out of Sri Lanka, and then it'll ask to a larger question that Ross Douthat in the New York Times posed on their in their opinion section yesterday. Is this persecution that we're starting to see that's happening specifically into the U.S. system, or is this simply just a revelation that they've had a privileged position for years? And so we'll be talking a little bit about that, and then we'll also transition to talk about the census numbers. Specifically, the Supreme Court now will appear to hear a case relative to can you put a question on the census relative to citizenship. And so we will entertain that question as well and have Chelsey weigh in on that. And so we will be back, though, right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. We've covered the practice of Kaporos on this program before. If you've forgotten, Kaporos is a sacred religious ceremony performed by Orthodox Jewish congregations for several millennia. In the ceremony, which takes place during the holiest days of the Jewish calendar, the atonement of sins is contemplated through prayer and the kosher and humane killing of a chicken. But as we've discussed previously, animal rights activists in California sued to force government officials to prohibit the ceremony. First Liberty attorneys argued that it's not the role of the government to tell religious communities how to peacefully exercise their religious beliefs. In fact, over the last few years, First Liberty and our network attorneys have successfully defended the Chabad of Irvine, a small synagogue in Orange County, California, against 2 lawsuits brought by activists opposed to Kaporos. But of course, the animal rights activists appealed the dismissal of 1 lawsuit to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. Well, about a week after oral argument, the Ninth Circuit came out with its decision. Its conclusion? That the animal rights groups didn't even have the legal ability to bring the lawsuit in the first place. While it was decided on procedural grounds, the court's decision brings a resounding conclusion to several years of harassment by lawsuit of a peaceful religious practice. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts, and joining me at the Millennial Roundtable, we have Chelsey, Youman, and David Fraga. And like we mentioned in the previous segment, a programming note, that the Millennial Roundtable will be transitioning and moving similar to the Jeffersons. While the Jeffersons were moving on up, we'll be moving on back. And we will be moving over to the Tuesday time, and so we'll take over the Tuesday show. Is that a good? I feel comfortable about that. That was was that kind of funny, kind of corny. Reminded you of Thanksgiving, kind of corn's back. Okay, maybe no more. Okay, so we are moving the Millennial Roundtable to Tuesday, and so you'll want to be sure to make that switch starting on May 7th. And so moving forward, let's talk a little bit more about what's the news that's coming out of Sri Lanka right now. And like was mentioned before, Sri Lanka, obviously, many of us are attuned to the reality that they suffered a great tragedy over the weekend, over the holiday weekend, specifically on Easter, targeting Christians. And I think what was so interesting is that there was a lot of blowback, and I don't know if any of you saw this as well, when the reactions that started to come out and the statements that started to follow. There were certain entities and individuals that were, I don't know if they just decided not to use the word Christian in their responses. And so it was perplexing because they called them Easter worshipers. Was one particular person that will remain nameless has decided to call them.
Oh, can you specify?
There was another person that said that this was an attack against humanity. And there was this allergic nature that happened where there were certain individuals that had decided that they were not going to use the word Christian in their response. And so there was other ways to be able to describe that. Now, there's parts of me, and I know Chelsey will take umbrage with this. There's parts of me that understand, because there were a variety of people that lost their lives in this tragedy. It wasn't simply just Christians that lost their lives. There were people that were at the hotels that necessarily weren't Christians. And so perhaps not using that term Christians would be something, but there's also another side of the argument that I'm sure someone at the table will assume this side, whereas there's just still this bent towards the conservative, towards identifying that Christians suffered under persecution. What we know to be true, they're the most persecuted religious group in the world right now for years running on end. And so there's just an inability for individuals to be able to identify Christians when they suffer such persecution. And so Chelsey, give me your working theory as to why a group or an individual would not utilize the term Christian when identifying persecution and killing that happened towards them.
This is news to me. I've been a little bit buried lately, so maybe I just missed that. But I think what's unfortunate is that what it does is it disparages really the reasons that so many lost their lives, and the reasons that could glorify God. If people start to ask, why would someone, what were they believing? What were they doing there in their ceremony? There are still people around the world who don't know much about the Christian faith. If they're to ask, well, now what is Easter Sunday? We don't want to hide from real hard facts, which are people attending those services were probably Christians. So that is really just unfortunate to me, but it also really disparages, I think, a lot of the lives that were lost. And it's just smoke and mirrors. That's frustrating. Just be forthright.
So David, we'll give you comment on this. And so I'll go ahead and name them. So former President Obama tweeted, quote, "The attacks on tourists and Easter worshipers in Sri Lanka are an attack on humanity. On a day devoted to love, redemption, and renewal, we pray for the victims and stand with the people of Sri Lanka." And then Hillary Clinton said, quote, "On this holy weekend for many faiths, we stand united against hatred and violence. I'm praying for everyone affected by today's horrific attacks on Easter worshipers and travelers in Sri Lanka." Obviously, Dennis Prager over at the Daily Signal took quite a bit of saw a lot of problems, we'll say, with these comments, specifically the inability to be able to say Christian and utilizing this term Eastern worshipers. And he says, quote, "Sometimes a few sentences tell you more about a person and more important an ideology than a learned thesis." And so is he making too much of this? Do you think there's something there? What's your take on this?
Yeah, so I think he's just trying to be, quote unquote, politically correct, right? Just because a lot of his supporters are very, like, for both Obama and Clinton, they're just more open towards like different things, and like, oh, for example, like just different religions. You can't say certain like Christianity because I may not be a Christian, so that might offend me, right? there are other people in these hotels that for Western tourists that obviously, like we were saying before, they're not Christian. But I mean, you can expect from these people what we've already been seeing in the past from them, So you can already expect that they're going to put comments out there in order to be like, hey, we see what's going on in the world, and we want to lift them up in prayer or lift them up and like acknowledge them in a way. So you can respect that from these comments in a way. But I don't think like to take an offense from it is quite like needed there per se, because I don't know.
Well, typically you refer to a sectarian cause by words that that faith uses.
Exactly.
So we say Islamic correctly, we say Muslim correctly. We, Lord knows we go above and beyond, not to say, what do they say now? You can't say extremists. Is that what?
Yeah, radicals.
Radical. Everything is politically correct unless it touches Christendom.
Yeah.
And that's what's frustrating, because it's just use the words I've never even heard Easter worship is not an actual phrase.
Yeah, we worship on Easter, but we don't worship Easter, right? Yeah. So, but again, like, and here's where I'll be. Of course, I'll be kind of the devil's advocate in this conversation. I guess I just don't take umbrage. I especially from former President Obama, I think he was pretty clear on it. Attacks on tourists.
That's who said it.
Yeah, Obama and Clinton.
And so, and then Hillary Clinton. And so, like, I don't think this is something to take umbrage with. I to give pause on. I think they express their sympathy. It just seems as though for one, I just don't want to play.
It's not the point. Maybe I agree with you, but you brought it up, so I had to talk about it.
I've been very, frustrated, kind of exhausted by this, because it seems like we're playing into the same patterns. It seems like it's a built-in controversy generator, right?
Yeah.
Like we have to get controversial. We have to generate stir, even when there's nothing. There's already something to get stir about, and it diverts attention from the necessary thing that we should be giving attention to, which specifically in this instance is what happened in Sri Lanka. In this instance, it's trying to figure out what is the reach of ISIS now as they continue to shift away from a position whereby they're trying to create a caliphate, and they move towards a position of trying to educate as well as inculcate their skill set and their mentality to various other tribes and entities in order to be able to enact terror. I think that's where the attention needs to be given in this particular moment, because we're starting to see now a mobility of ISIS that we have not yet seen before, to the extent that they can cause an attack, and they can strike and create an attack that literally takes out over 350 people, of which Americans are in that mix, which brings an added interest towards us. So I'll be interested to hear from you. What do you have to say on this matter? And so you can call in. Is this a ginned up controversy relative to former President Obama, former Secretary of State Clinton, or is this something to be significant about? Or perhaps you want to ask a question about ISIS right now, or lend your comment about ISIS. You can do so at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can go on the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You'll see the live video feed going on, and then right underneath the comment below as well, you can leave a comment or question, and what you say online we'll try to get to over air as well. We've got to take a break, but when we come back, more of the Millennial Roundtable on Point of View.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts. And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, April 24th, 2019 day. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us for the Millennial Roundtable of Point of View, moving into, that's right, the third hour. And so if you were with us during the first hour, we talked a little bit with Girien Salazer of the Faith and Education Coalition of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Coalition. We were talking with him specifically about some of the data that has come out relative to schools and how they're reaching out towards Hispanic families and how the opportunities that abound to be able to help Hispanic students to be able to not only to get into college, but also to thrive in college. And so there was some great conversations. And obviously, if you've been listening with Girien for a while now, what we know is that he's a pretty big Spurs fan. So he's kind of going through a tough time right now because the Spurs find themselves down 3-2 to the Nuggets. But nevertheless, we will believe they will persist. No offense to our Colorado, Denver listening audience. And so during the second hour, we talked a little bit more about what was happening in Sri Lanka. And so specifically, we gave attention to how this is just continuing to be a growing trend, how there's just a number of individuals that have now come out, and we're hearing more about the loss of lives and the details of those who lost their lives. I'm just struck by, there was one Danish billionaire who lost his wife and a child. We know that there was an American child that was on leave from an elite DC school that lost her life as well. We just continue to hear more and more of these stories of individuals that have lost their lives, and how, to a large degree, this extremist group, this terrorist group in Sri Lanka was aided by a terrorist group that we know very well, that being ISIS, and how ISIS was able to coordinate with and help pull off this terrorist attack that now numbers victims upwards of 350 people. And so our prayers go out to them. And so even though we hear more and more about the stories of those that lost their lives, we cannot forget that this took place on Easter, and amidst persecution, amidst our celebration of resurrection, we remember not only the persecution, but also we remember that resurrection isn't just something that we celebrate, it's something that we believe in as well. And the God that rose Jesus from the grave and has defeated death upon the cross is the same God that's able to utilize the evil of this world to bring about his good purposes, and knows that in the end he will triumph. And it is our turn to make a little bit of heaven come down here to earth, namely justice to reign and flow down like a mighty river, and then also to be hopeful and pray for those individuals that have lost their lives. And so finally, during this last hour, I want to talk about a couple of things during our time together. Specifically, I want to talk about this Ross Douthat piece that talked about the delineation specifically with privilege and persecution. And so are Christians here in the U.S. being persecuted, or do they find themselves with more privilege? And so he wrote this fascinating column in the New York Times, and we're going to touch on that here in the hour. And then we're also, one of the things that I'm really interested in talking about during our time together is on the movie Unplanned. Mm-hmm. And so we talked about that a little bit during the first hour with Chelsey, and we're going to circle back to that here later on here in the third hour. And specifically, I want us to think through some of the difficult, we can continue to talk about the news about how Unplanned is experiencing great difficulty and blowback from this movie. So certain entities aren't reviewing it. Certain social media entities are either erasing their followers, banning them to a large degree, removing their presence from certain social media sites. Like, they're experiencing a lot of blowback. But despite all that blowback they're experiencing, they're doing so well at the box office. The opening weekend, they had over $4 million they earned at the box office, and they continue to do really well. And for those listeners that are unaware, Unplanned is a movie that documents how a former Planned Parenthood worker, someone that was rising in the ranks of Planned Parenthood, comes to realize what Planned Parenthood was doing, which is committing abortions, understands the weight and the significance of Planned Parenthood, and then decides that she was once a former advocate for pro-choice, but now becomes a fierce pro-advocate for the pro-life cause. And so the movie documents that transition and just how much of a powerful force that she is. And so one of the things that I'm interested in talking about here later on during the hour about Unplanned is understanding the is there such an allergicness? Why is there so much of a silence that's being put on the pro-life cause in the general certain media entities? Why is that issue in particular so one of those things that don't even broach? Like, I'm just fascinated by that. And then the second piece of what I want to do is I don't want to just address the issue. I want to talk about potential solutions. And so, like, how can we move forward from this and not simply just lament the current state, but move to a better state? And so I think that's a conversation worthy of having. And I'm really interested in figuring this out, partially just because I've spent a little bit more time studying Bill Buckley. And so for those listeners that are aware, Bill Buckley was just a fierce advocate and a foundational voice for the modern conservative movement here in the United States. Buckley was an individual. He was an institution builder. If there's a lot of ways that I could describe Bill Buckley, he was a prolific writer. He was a witty conversationist. He was an avid sailor, but he was an institution builder. He built National Review. He built Young Americans for Freedom. He built that new conservative party. Like, he just, former mayor for New York, former candidate for mayor of New York. He was a fierce builder of institutions, and those institutions brought about certain changes that still survive to this day. And it makes me wonder, especially as we increasingly become aware and find ourselves amidst a very antagonistic environment whereby we can't get into certain media outlets and we experience such blowback, do we need to create new institutions? So, for example, do we need to create new Twitters? Do we need to create new Facebooks? And Buckley decided that he wasn't simply just going to do his program Firing Line on PBS. He was going to create a new news magazine. He wasn't just going to write in the New York Times, but he was also going to write in National Review. And he became the voice, and he also started National Review that exists to this day. And so I'll be really interested to talk about some of that as well. But we've got to go to a break right now. But know that we are going to be interested to hear from you. That's right, Chelsey. I'm going to be interested to hear from you once I stop talking so much. Will that be
you're gonna. I got a lot of coffee today, so buckle up. Okay,
I'm ready. And so you can call in, and so when we come back from the break, we'll be talking. We're going to transition over to this privileged or persecuted conversation with Ross Duthout. And so if you'd like to call in, you can do so at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can log on to facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and underneath the live video feed, you can leave a comment or question, and what you share online, we'll try to get to over air. And then when we come back from the break, more on Ross Duthout, really interested from the Christian American perspective. Are we more privileged, or are we experiencing persecution? And then after that, we're going to talk a little bit more about Unplanned, this movie, specifically why and how. Why is it that certain media entities are so prone to not talk about the pro-life position? And then how we can move forward in light of that antagonism that we experience. We'll be back, though, right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Executives from Facebook and Twitter testified on Capitol Hill 2 weeks ago. All the big tech companies deny that they are engaged in any censorship, but the members of the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee provided a number of examples. The executive from Twitter stressed that his platform does not use political viewpoints, perspective, or party affiliation in making decisions about content or rankings. The other executive wanted to state unequivocally that Facebook does not favor one political viewpoint over another, nor does Facebook suppress conservative speech. Senator Marsha Blackburn wanted to know why her pro-life ad was pulled during the 2018 campaign because Twitter deemed it inflammatory. It is worth noting that she did receive an apology from the executive, who added that they made a mistake on your ad. Senator Ted Cruz pointed to a Susan B. Anthony list ad that was banned, added a picture of Mother Teresa with her quote, "Abortion is profoundly anti-woman." At the top of the poster in the committee room was the word censored. Chuck Konselman is the writer and director of the movie Unplanned. He told his story of the obstacles he faced in marketing the movie through Google and Twitter. He did give credit to Facebook as the one social media platform where he didn't have problems. Senator Cruz also warned that antitrust laws might eventually be used on the big tech companies if things don't change. He noted that these big tech companies are larger and more powerful than when Standard Oil was broken up, and larger and more powerful than AT&T when it was broken up. Some Democratic members of the subcommittee believe that charges of censorship are baseless, but I don't know how you could say that with all the examples that were cited. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From 20th Century Fox and Franklin Entertainment, Breakthrough, starring Chrissy Metz, based on a true story. Breakthrough, rated PG, now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute and David Fraga. We have been talking a little bit, or actually, I've been talking a lot of it, would probably be the best descriptor of what's been happening as of the late. And so we have been talking a little bit, and now let's transition to argument, shall we? And so we are going to be talking about, are Christians privileged or are they persecuted? Ross Douthat has a fascinating article in the New York Times yesterday, kind of putting together this dichotomy, especially in light of some of the conversations that have been happening around Sri Lanka. And so I just want to highlight a couple of points in particular. And so you have, he says, quote, there is by treating, with one hand, elite liberalism seeks to keep Christianity at arm's length, to reject any specifically Christian identity for society it aims to rule. But with the other, it treats Christianity as something that really exists only in relationship to its own secularized humanitarianism, either as a tamed and therefore useful chaplaincy or as an embarrassing and need of correction uncle. And so it gets to this point that he's trying to point out in the piece about this idea of in the U.S. specifically, is it more of an emphasis upon the privileged position that Christianity has taken, thus the need to overcompensate and be less than fair in its critique of it, or less than fair in its treatment of it would probably be the better word, or two, is there a persecution for Christians here in the U.S.? And so I figured, why not have this conversation with someone that has given their life to First Amendment issues, specifically speaking up on the freedom of religion? And so, Chelsey, we'll let you lead this off. And as is usually the case, I'm going to always take the opposite side of you.
Okay.
And
I'm actually interested to hear where you fall on this. I'm not sure.
I'm literally going to just take the opposite side that you take.
I don't know.
And so like I have two balancing arguments in my head right now. And so whatever
Okay, so
side,
what are my options?
Okay.
Like very
Okay, so
layman's,
let's just go.
I'm a 3-year-old.
Let's just go. Are Christians privileged here in the U.S. or are they persecuted here in the U.S.?
In the U.S.?
In the U.S. I'm
Because
giving
wasn't
emphasis,
this article relating to Sri Lanka?
It was relating to Sri Lanka, but I want to give us emphasis upon the U.S.
Okay.
But if you want to take the larger picture, I think I couldn't. I don't know if I can make a case that Christians aren't persecuted around the world. The numbers are overwhelmingly clear that that's happening around the world. I just want to know, is there more of an emphasis upon Christians being privileged here in the U.S., or are they more persecuted here in the U.S.?
Okay, well, I got an opinion about that, but before I get there, I just have to make this massive caveat because I think it's insensitive and ill-advised to ever compare the persecution we have in the quote unquote what you're saying persecution in the U.S. Whatever we're going to call that and identify that as, to martyrdom happening across the world. People who are there's a difference between emotional harm and very tangible harms and your rights being squelched and physical harm that many Christians are having from around the world. So I have to start by saying I'm going to be talking about
caveat.
With not martyrdom, no physical harm here in the U.S., with our First Amendment rights intact. What does that look like right now? And not at all be making a comment on the horrible thing that happened in Sri Lanka this weekend, just because I think there's such a difference between the two. So with that caveat, I just see an immense amount of pressure against Christians, specifically in our country, for their beliefs. A really great example of this, besides what I do every day and the amount of people calling me every single day saying, I was threatened to be fired for my beliefs. We're losing funding before our beliefs. We are told we can't contract and place children in homes because of our beliefs. I can't tell you the hundreds of calls I get like that every year. So I would just be lying if I didn't say that there is a pressure on Christians in the U.S. because of their unpopular beliefs. A really tangible example of this is a video I watched. A street preacher sent me out of Seattle, Washington. And he is, typically you think of a street preacher, we all have kind of preconceived ideas about that, but he's out there with his wife and toddler. And all he's doing is talking about Jesus in the Bible. So very positive from a street preacher standpoint. And people were coming up to him and screaming at him and spitting on him and yelling the F word at him, being just very almost physically intimidating to him and his kid that's right there. And all he's doing was talking about the love of Jesus. His entire sermon was about the love of Jesus. That was such a clear image to me of the way I'm seeing Christian views just become such a target in our country. And I'm not saying that historically Christendom hasn't been the predominant faith. I'm not saying we're a minority faith. I'm not saying that we don't still have really strong rights intact. What I'm saying is the culture is weak, even when the law is strong, or even when Christian faith is strong. The culture has become weak.
Okay. David, thoughts?
My turn?
Yep, your turn.
All right. So definitely I could, see how here in the States that persecution's a very different thing, obviously, we were talking about. But, man, I do see, you have to kind of start defining the word privileged. In what way does that look like? Does that mean like economically? Does that mean, we're safer in some ways? We are protected. We have resources, kind of like people are calling you, that's a resource. Also research and just how we have the ability to go online and to look up someone's number or to get connected with groups who we can come to a united front and protest some things. That is something that just doesn't happen in other countries. The governments would shut that down, or other people will shut that down in forms of violence. You see a lot of things just going on of violence across nations, right? Or they have to be very secretive when it comes to Christianity, right?
I think that might be like the delineation that needs to be made relative from around the world to here. So what is here common is the heckler's veto. So that's the difficulty that we face, but it's not the persecution that we face. Whereas over there in Sri Lanka, which is a prime example of this, is that's persecution.
Right.
because it's not simply a heckler's veto. They would welcome a heckler's veto,
right?
Because they're bringing bombs over there. But so I think that's a point to be made. I guess I'm just keenly aware that I think I'm more concerned because I'm understanding the world in which we're living in now is. It might seem as though we're experiencing more difficulty here in the U.S., and I think a part of the reason why we're experiencing more difficulty isn't necessarily because we've changed our beliefs. Maybe it's more because there's increasingly less of them, or less of us, rather. So there was a study that was just put out. The percentage of U.S. adults who belong to a church or other religious institution has plunged by 20 percentage points over the past 2 decades, hitting a low of 50% last year, according to a new Gallup study. So Gallup said church membership was 70% in 1999, and since then it's fallen down to 50%. So just over the past 20 years. Yeah. And so maybe it's not necessarily that the culture is more antagonistic towards us. It's just that the antagonism is louder because there's more of them and less of us than there used to be. Maybe?
Okay, first, who cares? I mean, who cares? The result is the same, right?
Okay.
But I disagree because of my line of work.
Okay.
And what I'm saying is that I represent predominantly people of Christian faith.
Okay.
Although I do have Jewish and Muslim clients. We've represented a Native American sweat lodge. I mean, we will represent anyone of any faith. If you believe the sky is purple, we'll represent you. The point being, my docket is so predominantly focused on those with Christian views for a reason. And that's because the amount of people challenging other minority faiths is not as big as the amount challenging ours.
Yeah.
It's just not. We all have resources available to us. The Islamic community has CARE. They also have groups like us. The Jewish community has their own advocacy groups. So that we all have the same issues. But I would say when you're really looking at just sheer volume, it is Christian faith that has come under attack recently. And I don't know how recent, but our culture has certainly changed from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s. Church going and attendance has gone down. People who actually know their Bible and read the Bible, those statistics have gone down. So I think we're a less Christian nation, yes, than ever. But the animosity, for some reason, correlates with that.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can distinguish between what happens here at the U.S. and elsewhere, but animosity towards the gospel is animosity.
Yeah.
Right. And
that's built
into
the
I almost
cake.
wonder historically, and maybe you guys can speak to this, historically, where do you get to a Sri Lanka? How does that slide happen? Where do you get to a Holocaust where we go from we're just hostile towards the Jewish views to we want to murder them? That's a question.
I mean, that's like a concept creep, right? So Jonathan Haidt documents this in The Coddling of the American Mind. He used to say that their trauma was limited to a crash that you experienced, but now it's pretty common parlance to be able to describe trauma as a thought that you encounter that's detrimental to you. And so now you encounter trauma. It's the teacher didn't give me a trigger warning that helped me understand that I was about to walk into something like this. We got to go to a break. We'll be back right after this.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm just glad that the microphones weren't on during the break, because then I just got utterly defeated in an argument, and so I feel good about just pretending like it didn't happen, and then just coming back out here and pretending like I'm still like.
Let's just switch topics.
no,
transition.
But yeah, we are going to transition a little bit, because again, I think we can all agree that not only is it baked into the cake that after you follow Jesus, that you're going to experience difficulty, you're going to experience persecution. Let me talk slowly and make sure that we all are keenly aware of this for those that have ears to hear. Jesus says that you will have trouble in this world in John 16:33. Paul tells a young Timothy in 2 Timothy 3:12, indeed, all who desire to live a godly life will be persecuted. And Peter says, don't be surprised at the fiery ordeal that comes among you, from 1 Peter 4:12. We have brothers and sisters around the world that are experiencing persecution. Over 360 individuals every month lose their lives for faith-related reasons, according to Open Doors. Over 105 buildings every month are either attacked or destroyed because of their faith-based reasons. It's very clear that persecution is happening around the world. Pew Center has done studies, and they have continued to find for year after year now that Christianity is the most persecuted religious group around the world. We can delineate here in the U.S. whether we are experiencing persecution or we are experiencing difficulty. And I want to hold two truths in both hands for a second. One, I want to say that we are experiencing difficulty right now. That's why I am exceedingly grateful for individuals like Chelsey Youman and institutions like First Liberty that are standing up and standing strong for those that are experiencing that difficulty here in the U.S. But on the flip side, they're fighting for the things that our founders, by God's grace, put and baked into our cake so that religious entities can do good work that benefits those in their communities and outside of their faith-based traditions. These are individuals that are doing great work for their community and raising the tide that's causing all the boats to rise up as well. And so, yes, we are experiencing difficulty here in the U.S. Yes, around the world that we are being persecuted. But also, let's thank God that we still live in a country that there's beliefs and there's groups like First Liberty that are fighting to make sure that religious-based organizations have an opportunity to pursue after the glory of God for the good of this world and the joy of their soul. Switching gears, let's talk about Unplanned.
Amen.
So we have Unplanned, that is one of those movies that is, because of the freedoms that we've been given, has an opportunity to be able to speak the life message and help individuals to see the horrors that is abortion right now. And Unplanned has experienced great difficulty from a social media side, from a media side, they're being silenced. But yet, despite those difficulties and obstacles, they're still doing really well. It's unbelievable how well they're doing at the box office right now. But Chelsey, one of the things, because you're so immersed in this issue and you inspire me, one of the things that I want to figure out is why. Why do you think the world, I want to say the world, I know that's such a general term. Why do you think there's certain entities that they're just allergic to the life issue? They don't cover it. They don't give voice to it. They do everything they can to silence it. What makes this the golden calf for them?
I can't speak to that. I mean, I genuinely don't know or don't understand. I mean, we have this issue with a lot of conservative leaning issues or Christian issues. First and foremost, this one is Christian for me, faith-based, but there are a lot of issues the left doesn't engage in. But this one particularly, there is an animosity against the life movement. And the only way I can describe it is once upon a time when I was a young law student, 2 weeks before my bar exam, this was extremely negligent of me, but again, I'm a 7, so it happened. I took a trip from Dallas to Austin to go watch Wendy Davis debate at our state legislature.
Mm-hmm.
And she was the big pro-choice advocate, and it was a horrible thing at our legislature.
Yep.
But I went to watch her debate 2 weeks before the bar because I wanted to go see really what the other side's arguments are, because I truly in my heart of hearts believe that when you are pro-abortion, you are not dealing with abortion on its terms. We can talk about the options women have. We can talk about their health, but those are all side issues that no one I've ever debated on the abortion issue is willing to talk about the nuts and bolts of what an abortion in truth and actuality is, and it's the ending of a life. Right. It is the ending of a life. And we have to start there if we're going to talk about abortion, because that's what it is. And, going down there, my eyes were really opened in a sad way to how blind the other side is. I do think, there is a spirit of confusion. There are a lot of lies pulled on the other side about this, because I believe that being pro-life is pro-woman.
Yeah.
The support system, pregnancy resource centers do more than just provide medical care, which is all abortion clinics do. They provide emotional support systems, connect women with churches, meet their challenges and needs where they're at. So if they're having like a specific initial trauma in their life, they help women get food stamps. They help women get on their feet, housing situations, out of domestic abuse situations. That is pro-woman, enabling and empowering a woman to make a choice that saves that child's life, even if that choice leads to adoption. There are other alternatives out there. But what the other side, I think, does is it's a lot of smoke and mirrors and, frankly, a lot of lies. And they don't tell women all of the options. I think Unplanned did a great job. By the way, Unplanned is entirely true. They said every single, I went to a viewing where the producers and the real life people came out and said every single thing that happened in that movie is true. And what the other side does is they don't tell women everything. They don't even give them all the medical information. They don't let them have sonograms when you walk into the clinics or see the sonogram. How is that really a woman's choice? Right. So I think for me, that's my big issue with the other side is I want to deal with everything on its terms. And I think that being pro-woman means the woman knows and understands everything. And I don't think the other side can say the same, and they don't want to hear it.
Yeah. David, do you have any thoughts? Like, I'd be interested to know, like, when you've interacted with the pro-choice side from a pro-life position, like, what's the arguments that you're hearing? Help us understand. Maybe it's from the media side. Why is there such it's not even an affinity. Why is there such a silencing of from the other side or from our side, or accurately conveying our side? Help us to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you were just talking about how there's almost like a gray area that they don't want to enter into.
Right.
Because there's probably a fear that, they're going to back out. They're going to think that the whole mirror is going to shatter, per se. But I'm just reminded of something that I read a book one time, or maybe it was an article, but about war and how they started to dehumanize the enemy a lot of times in World War II. They start changing targets. They start changing all these things in order for that human to not feel a connection with that other human being. And so in the same way, you can almost see how this could be a parallel of just like not showing the sonograms, not explaining all the trauma that could take place, right, from the abortion and all those things, not being specific, but instead of just bringing confusion in the sense of like, we're not going to release all the information because it is going to be a connection that is beyond us in a way. Right. So that is, that was kind of what I want to touch base on. But the second part is also more of what I'm hearing is just the choice kind of thing, which is, I honestly can't speak in too much in this area because I've only heard what I've heard, obviously, but like I've only heard of just like, well, you need to be more understanding that what about the women who didn't have a choice to be pregnant? What about the women who were hurt in this, right? One thing I did see on the website of Unplanned that I really loved is how many resources they had. They had option lines. They had, if you want to transition into a different line of work, they had numbers that say, hey, we'll be confidential, but we will also help you, right? It's not just saying, hey, here's the problem, but hey, these are steps we can take together and surrounding each other as a community, right?
Yeah, that's been some of the news that's come out that apparently, according to CBN, which is Christian Broadcast News, they found that over 100 abortion workers have left their jobs because of after seeing the movie.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that is incredible.
Yeah, so
the website said 500.
Yeah, really?
Yeah,
wow,
500,
wow.
yeah.
So not only are we starting to see, and maybe this is just, maybe we're trying to put physical terms on it, but maybe it's a spiritual battle.
Oh, it's absolutely a spiritual battle. And the one thing I do want to say about Unplanned is it was very hard. It was a very difficult movie to watch. I mean, there were scenes that made me literally nauseous, but it's true. You can't deny it. And so kudos to the people who made it, who said, we want to show this for what it is.
I am.
It's good.
And I want to make sure, like, I want to make sure I give deference to the spiritual nature of this, recognizing Ephesians 6:12 that our powers are not against the rulers and authorities of this air, but against the spirit of the air, right? Like, I want to recognize that. And I also, though, know that there's things that I can do more than I can pray, but there's also things that I can do. And part of the reason why we can do that is I want to wrestle with it. And what are the things that we can do, divinely empowered, utilize here on earth in order to make abortion unthinkable and eradicate it? And how can we come alongside women to help them understand that they do have that choice not to end that child's life? But we'll talk more about that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. We've covered the practice of Kaporos on this program before. If you've forgotten, Kaporos is a sacred religious ceremony performed by Orthodox Jewish congregations for several millennia. In the ceremony, which takes place during the holiest days of the Jewish calendar, the atonement of sins is contemplated through prayer and the kosher and humane killing of a chicken. But as we discussed previously, animal rights activists in California sued to force government officials to prohibit the ceremony. First Liberty attorneys argued that it's not the role of the government to tell religious communities how to peacefully exercise their religious beliefs. In fact, over the last few years, First Liberty and our network attorneys have successfully defended the Chabad of Irvine, a small synagogue in Orange County, California, against 2 lawsuits brought by activists opposed to Kaporos. But of course, the animal rights activists appealed the dismissal of 1 lawsuit to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. Well, about a week after oral argument, the Ninth Circuit came out with its decision. Its conclusion? That the animal rights groups didn't even have the legal ability to bring the lawsuit in the first place. While it was decided on procedural grounds, the court's decision brings a resounding conclusion to several years of harassment by lawsuit of a peaceful religious practice. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hey, and welcome back to Point of View. We were talking about who we follow on Instagram. It wouldn't be a Millennial Roundtable if we weren't following if we weren't talking about who we're following on Instagram, right?
That's true, actually.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a Millennial. So I find and I was actually sharing with some friends the other night, and maybe you all can relate. There used to be a day when I first started on Instagram that all I did was follow my friends, and so I would
goodness,
see.
my first posts are abominable.
Yeah,
it's like,
have you deleted?
It's like a post of a photo. Ooh, I should do that. It's like
I've deleted
I almost
way
do it
back.
to enshrine it forever in
like-
ridiculousness.
That's
It's like
my-
a flower with like
Bethel.
5 filters on it, and I don't know why, because nobody knew how to use Instagram.
No. And now I'm like, I follow mostly it's just memes or GIFs or like funny little things or little clips. Barstool Sport. Like I just I'm all over the place now. And like when I see my friends actually post something, I'm like, why are you messing up my feed? I want to see the funny stuff. I don't care what you're doing.
Go through, you can always tell based on my feed, like what phase I'm in. So I'll have like a bunch of like health stuff. And then I'll be like on a shopping feed for a while. And I like follow or like design stuff.
And those algorithms, they'll get you
Yeah.
though.
I know.
And you'll start just seeing things that you've been talking about.
It's funny. There's and the Atlantic had an article on this, the new Instagram, and it talked about how Instagram influencers. And so for our audience, if you're an Instagram influencer, you have like 10,000
You have
people.
no real job.
Yeah, and you just make a ton of money off these sponsored posts or whatever because you're like getting sponsored for pants that you're wearing or some drink that you're drinking or some health product that you're hawking. And so one of the things that Dave was talking about, though, was just a previous season, I guess we'll say. I don't even know how long it was. There was just an emphasis on creating this beautiful, perfect image, like with your DSLR camera, just a really great image. And now there's a move towards more of a gritty, like even like a 70s feel to it. And so I'm not on it enough. Literally, this is the irony of ironies. I know I'm hosting the Millennial Roundtable, but I need you to know that on my phone, there is my folder for social media. It doesn't say social media at the top. It says waste of time on it there now. And so like anytime like I'm on it, I have to be keenly aware to click through my waste of time to be able to get to my funny memes.
You could just delete the app, which my husband did.
No, I'm not to that
I
point
can't
yet.
commit to that.
Do you hide your app?
No, I just unlimit it.
I straight
Loud
up
and proud.
I hide it. So it takes me a little bit less time to find
But
it.
I try not to waste it. I mean, I don't think I waste that much time. But I waste some pretty good time sending memes to my sister and friends.
Yeah. You've got to. That I think it adds
Memes.
flavor to a conversation. So, but nevertheless, let's add some flavor to this conversation for the last little stretch. We've got 6 minutes before they kick us out of the building. And so help us to understand. Let's transition back to the unplanned. And let's go. We've talked a little bit about the why. Why is there such an affinity to not talk about the pro-life, to not give a voice to the pro-life position within certain media entities? Now let's talk about what we can do, because I think there's some really tangible action steps that we can take and get out of the ethereal 30,000 feet and get down to the dinner table. And let's talk about some of the marching orders that we can take in order to continue to see those abortion numbers go down. So, Chelsey, I yield to you because you're full of information on this.
Sure. Oh, gosh. Okay. I think there are a few things that I've actually been, just meeting with some friends in the pro-life movement recently and learning a little bit more about both the adoption foster care side, but also the pregnancy resource center side. And so pregnancy resource centers are clinics that serve women with unplanned pregnancies or who are facing challenges. There are, I think, 50 in the DFW area. A lot of times they're affiliated with a church. Find your local pregnancy resource center. They are on the beat already. They're already the grassroots of this movement. They're connected with women and they are doing the good work on this front. The problem is everyone I'm talking to is saying how under-resourced they are, and not just from a financial standpoint. So yes, donate, but also donate time. Be on a call line 5 hours a month or less. Show up, do a donation drive at your church. Really just see what they need. A lot of the ones I'm talking to say no one will help us with part-time work. So if you're my parents' age, if you're retired, if you're a student, if you've got time to just get some part-time work off your hands, go work, go volunteer as a nurse, help them with sonograms. There are just so many ways that you can help resource your clinic and actually be a part of the solution. Wow. And I think that we need people who are going to be warriors on this front, who are meeting with women and loving on women in their greatest times of need.
That's good.
Yeah.
Dave, what are you thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just reminded of just you seek and you will find kind of deal. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a need to mobilize and to more people to volunteer, to step out, to do the research and to actually go to these organizations and be those leaders, to lead and be like, hey, how can we connect? If we brought 5 of my friends forward, how can we connect once a week, once a month, whatever it looks like, in order to just do a baby shower, to do all these things, or to why? Because the need is there. Like there is such a big need for help for those clinics. There's such a big need for help for these women to hear about these things, to communicate it, right? So,
there's one other thing I have to just say this. So 50% of women who seek abortions are in our pews. They're church-going women.
Yeah.
And so, maybe even just, I've been so convicted of this lately that we need to be looking around us in our churches, in our pews, and say, how can we help come around women? I had a friend, and she kind of disappeared for a few years and then resurfaced with a 1-year-old. And she said, the one thing I wish someone had told me when I told my friends I was pregnant was that I could do this.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone told her it's going to be too hard. You can't do this. I think we as the church are the answer to that. We come around her. We can help her be a single mom. We can help her do a child placement. But really just like be eyes wide open to women around you who might be going through something you're not aware of, and be connected to our communities that way.
Yeah, and I could not agree more. Creating a culture of life, right? To recognize that we can cut the abortion rate in half if we just pay attention to the individuals that are seating beside us or are no longer sitting there. And then a second thing that I think is just a really kind of a thing, it's not even a big thing, is to recognize that we're supporting companies that are supporting Planned Parenthood right now. And so to recognize that I hate to name call right now, but I'll do it anyway. Like if you have an American Express card right now, you are supporting Planned Parenthood right now because American Express gives money to Planned Parenthood. And so you might be donating money to family health clinic. You might be donating to a local pregnancy center, which is great. It's a really good thing, a very admirable thing to do. But also know that your fees are going towards Planned Parenthood as well. And I was illuminated by this tactic known as impact investing. And so to be aware of where your investment money is going and where you're actually giving money to. And so you can find out more information on companies that are supporting Planned Parenthood or other entities like this. You can go to familycouncil.org. That will be directing you towards those particular ends. Because I think there's some really easy, tangible steps that you could take, not only with just the way the companies that you're supporting right now that are supporting the pro-choice side, but also the opportunities that abound around you. Like Chelsey was illuminating so well, is just the reality that many of these pregnancy centers are in desperate need of help right now, whether it's through your financial dollars or whether it's through your time of just being that person that waits in the waiting room with someone, or being a receptionist, or utilizing those skill sets that you've been equipped to do from 8 to 5. You just do those at a different time as well for the clinic. And so I would highly encourage you to get involved. But this is the end of the show. And so I want to say thank you so much, David. Appreciate you being here today.
Absolutely.
So good to see you. And Chelsey, as always, what a delight.
It's fun today, guys.
Yeah. So good, so good. And so thank you all so much for tuning in. Want to make you aware one last time that the Millennial Roundtable will be transitioning over to Tuesdays. That's right. Beginning May 7th, we will be transitioning the Millennial Roundtable away from a Wednesday, making it to Tuesday. Same conversation styles, same corny jokes, same, probably not same topics, but same, we'll be covering current news and trying to give a hopefully thoughtful, conservative response to the news. But we want to make sure that you follow along. And so please be sure to tune in, as well as go to the website, pointofview.net, to find out more information. We'll see you tomorrow.
This Easter, from 20th Century Fox and Franklin Entertainment comes Breakthrough, starring Chrissy Metz, based on a true story. When Joy Smith's son John falls through an icy Missouri lake, all hope seems lost. But a mother's belief in the power of prayer inspires her community to trust God to do the impossible.
Please, God, send your Holy Spirit to save my son.
Breakthrough, rated PG, parental guidance suggested. Now playing. Tickets and showtimes available at breakthroughmovie.com.
Ronald Reagan.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
What are you doing to pass on truth and freedom? As one step, have you joined Point of View Radio's Truth Team? If not, why not? Join today. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.